Yeah, so this was a different day. There was a different group of people a little bit.
It was a different day, a little bit of a different group of people, yeah. And I think we managed to start moving towards kind of an idea of sort of what are the established kind of parameters by which we're, what are the givens, what are we going to kind of move towards, and what are we kind of, where are we going to be looking to expand out from. I think there's still a lot of really good ideas. I think one of the biggest challenges is that we have a lot of people from a lot of different disciplines, which both is a really great advantage, but I think also means we tend to see things in the linear path that we see things going forward. The further out we look, the farther apart those ideas kind of become. And I think that's a challenge that we're sort of still needing to address as we move forward. I think there's a lot of really good opportunity to connect as a group and figure out what it is that we're really trying to accomplish. And I think that's what I'd like to see kind of come next steps. What are our key objectives that we want to hit, right? And then create sort of a framework that we can start working together and take advantage of the different disciplines that we have in order to come up with a cohesive plan of action. I know some people, in some cases, we're talking about advocacy and political advocacy. We're talking about, working through the different channels there, within city planning and municipal planning. I think there's another side that is sort of the visioning and being able to share that vision. And so I think there's a lot of room. I think that's where I'm kind of looking, that's where I'm excited about. I like the idea of visioning, and I think that we've already got, because we generally have the idea of what the specific, because of, I guess, where you started, right? Like, we have an idea of what the specific vehicles could be, at least in their kind of earliest form. I think the next piece is to really identify, and I personally, for me, I still really like the idea of creating that larger vision to go, okay, this is what we want to do and where we want to go, and then creating a plan for how we can get that information out there and create grassroots interest in it. We did similar stuff, right? Like, that's how we were doing things, whether we liked it or not, for better or worse, when we were doing stuff at Local Motors. And previous to, even before we got there with the Rally Fighter, we were doing stuff in the media. The car was out there more in the media than it ever was in the actual in-person. And there's aspects of that I think would be really cool, is sharing that vision, starting to make it more, that people start to recognize things out of their normal places. So that when we have an opportunity to show scale, or show small scale examples, show large scale examples, or true size examples, and we start having things actually moving and running, that other people automatically start understanding what it is, and they're like, oh, there's that thing, there's that cool thing I heard about, or there's this. There's a lot there, I think, and I'm excited for where that can go. Something that came up today that stood out for me, I know I'm going on a long rant here. Something that came up that was really stood out for me, that was very interesting, was in one of the videos that you had shown. There was a very key mention of third spaces, and third spaces to me are a very easy way to start connecting people, right? When people start visualizing what a third space is, we see them. They've gotten changed. They got basically destroyed. They've kind of come around. Inflation has really messed them up right now, right? A beer costs $8 at almost anywhere you go. They're no longer places that people just naturally gravitate towards, because it costs you $80 to go out as a family and just go grab some coffee and a beer at the end of the day, or whatever it might be. But I think there's a lot of really interesting room to connect, to think about that, and think about like a holistic kind of who we're solving things for, and that's still a big one for me. Yeah.
So the United States today has, if you look down on a car or an SUV or a pickup truck, it looks like a rectangle. I think of it as a rolling rectangle. It's the same basic size, and we've built that as a standard across the whole planet, the whole country. To talk about two pods, a micro-sized pod and a nanopod, one for two people, one for one person. And the one person that could go inside a building, could go inside a room, an elderly person could be in their lazy boy chair and go out to the swimming pool and never leave their seat.
Right, we call them active boy chairs, yeah.
Yeah, or they could go into the ferry, and they could go to, so instead of saying alternative transportation today doesn't have door to door, the pod future could be more than door to door, it could be room to room. But how, since you're an expert in co-creation, if we, instead of us designing what we think that looks like, we create some sort of a new standard off these two pods and put it out to the world, of architecture students, universities, technologists, whatever teams that want to get together, to imagine here's 2 new sizes of a new system. How would you design it? What would you design? I mean, do you think, because I know someone who's tried to go and do simulation type software and have university teams compete each other, but do you think some the students out there around the world could grab onto a new pod format or 2 different pods and then dream of how that could be applied?
I think breaking the mold of what is already understood around anything, mobility or any common, common form factor that already exists is always exciting. And I think what you're talking about here, this is what happens if you break the form factor of a bicycle, what happens if you break the form factor of a vehicle, break the form factor of a golf cart, right? Like some variation on that. I think you're always going to find a lot of interest in that, and I think what we haven't yet explored is all of the different solutions that can come out of something like that. And I don't even think, even when we talk to, I actually think you break it even further than just university students, right? Like I believe that I really strongly believe the idea of that everybody is a creative at heart, or everybody has creativity in them. It's part of what makes us human. And so I think the more you start to ask people to participate in that exchange, the more you start to ask people to imagine, like, even if you give them the basic foundations, what would you use this for? You start to find and explore and discover new use cases, new problems you didn't realize that needed to be solved. And I think there's a ton of opportunity there, because we are talking about, in that situation, we are really talking about what if we stopped thinking about transit or mobility strictly as just wheels on a frame that get you from one point to another, but when the reality is they do integrate very heavily in our lives already, whether we like it to or not, right? We sit in our vehicles for any number of period of time, depending on if we're commuting or whether we're traveling for out of state or whatever it is. And all of those things are really built around that one singular experience. And we've explored it a lot, where there's been situations where those were built they weren't even built for kind of universal people, right? Like there's like pregnant women, right, don't fit in seat belts very well. Women in general, like a lot of the sort of the 90-10 ranges for how they design people were just scaled down men at the lower stage of that. So there's a lot of room for understanding what the world could look like. And if we stop using the same assumptions of, we talked a lot today about this is the road structure that we have, and I think, yes, changing infrastructure around the roads, like that would be a hard thing to do, although there's a lot of room that we can manipulate and adjust those if you keep them there. And so if we started to help people break down some of those walls, or thinking about them differently, and not strictly being like, nope, this is the carriageway that we all have to go down, that's been the same carriageway for the last 150 years. What could it look like now if we did it differently? I think there's another piece to it that's really important. I know I'm going on for a long time.
That's fine.
The other piece I think is really different, that would be important to this, is helping people understand. You have to give them something to hope towards, or something to imagine themselves in that excites them. Similarly, we do talk a lot about last mile, or even just getting to your specific door. Because we've become a culture that doesn't like that. Actually, a majority of our culture, I would say, kind of has a disdain for walking anywhere, right? Like people don't. We've gone so far into, I don't want to have to cut grass, I don't want to have trees that shed leaves, I don't want to do this, and we've artificialized all these different things and kind of normalized so much of it that to just the lowest common denominator of laziness, that we almost have to have a cultural shift, especially in America. I think there's other communities around, and we are seeing it happen more and more. Like a lot of the planned communities are built around walking, but there's still really generally shitty spaces to be in. And so I think the idea of having of changing the concept of the planned community into planned mobility in a very broad sense gives us a lot of really great opportunities for what a future could be. And I'm really super excited by the fact that there's a lot of problems that can be solved just through some of these changes that there's a natural progression, right? Like I even mentioned on that a little bit, how emissions are going down in California due to electric vehicles, or just think about during COVID when it was quiet, well, for all the stuff that was negative during COVID, those were the positive things. That was like, oh, people were around and this was happening, or I don't know. We can get there, but it is interesting what it takes, like, and what happens, how fast things shift and ideas shift once everybody is kind of all thinking in the same or having a shared experience.
Great. Last question. We have an environmental crisis. I'd say we have an affordability crisis. And most people are used to the government trying to come up with a new solution for something on a regional, state level. Or we're used to like General Motors building the future for Denver, or for Google building the future for Denver. How is it, I mean, we're going into disruption. I mean, autonomy could take jobs and all this transition's coming. It seems like co-creation is so much better positioned to make stuff happen faster than expecting the old ways or big companies to solve our problems. Can you speak to that at all?
I can't, there's two pieces to it that I think are always the challenge, right? On one, co-creation as a mechanism it's something I think that there's a lot, I expect us to see more and more of it over time, because we've already integrated things like user-centered design into a huge majority of kind of the design practices around globally, right? We now, even the agile kind of development method and all of those things have had to figure out a way to start bringing in users earlier, so we're not going through waterfall approaches. Economies of scale are a big challenge with that, so I don't think necessarily about building you still need to find a solution that works for a lot of people, as opposed to trying to build one, these sort of micro variants of a lot of stuff, although that's a potential place to go there. But I think that we're about to see a bigger crisis. In addition to that crisis you were talking about, we're seeing an aging population. We're going to start seeing accessibility become a much bigger challenge across the board. In addition to you were saying, like, the affordability, you're going to have housing. All of these little pieces are going to start having to change, because they're going to have to account for a large population of kind of aging citizens. And so we are going to see that start to expand. And I think that we'll start seeing more and more value once we start getting out of the idea that co-creation is about, anybody engineering, but more about anybody's ideas are valuable and can help contribute to, to a solution. When it starts coming into the business side of things, it is hard to fight against a tsunami of money that's out there. That's a whole other conversation about wealth inequality. That divide is going further and further and further away. Personally, I actually think that the best way to get to is to work within that, not to try to figure out how we can create a system that's, exclusively private and making everybody richer, but having people who, finding funding from people who are interested in either changing that system and have the money to participate in changing it, right? Or who could back something like that are also on board with sort of a common good that we need to solve these problems, and this is, something that I'd be willing to support. I think the disruption needs to be supported by somebody who's willing to take the hit, right? And I don't want to throw out names of billionaires, but they're out there. There are some of them there, and there are the other ones who would fight tooth and nail to stop what we're talking about here. And I think we need to make sure that there's people with enough influence that can keep those voices from resonating farther than they need to.